Hello, I am Michael Phoenix, a developer and Agile consultant at Solutions IQ. This is narrative testing. Narrative testing is an approach to functional testing which is story-driven and interactive with the customer. It consists of a few key elements. One is that the tool used must support a customer-centric, customer domain-specific testing language. You have to be able to express the tests in the customer's language in order to minimize the translation distance between the customer's stories that they tell about the interaction between the end user and the application and the actual executable test. Now, whether this comes in the form of pseudo-English, like water, in the form of an actual domain, business natural language, domain language, which is parsed into tokens in the domain language, or a simple list of tokens like Selenium uses, it's still terms in the customer's domain, both nouns and verbs, which drive interactively the application under test, so that the customer can see not only the test they've specified in a language they can read, but the actual behavior of the application when it is being driven by this test. And if you have those components, a domain-specific testing language that you can customize, preferably a hierarchical one, so that the customer only has to go as deep as they want to go into the details of the test, and a parallel execution, step-by-step, walking through the test, and at the same time, those steps acting on the application under test, you have a narrative testing tool. The process of narrative testing consists of sitting down with the customer and asking them to talk with you about the dialogue between the user and the application. What happens next? Tell me the story. It's like taking a user story and then having the conversation with the user that the user's story promises, as if you were writing a play. Then the user does this, and then the computer does this, and then the user does this, and then the computer does that. I've had several people comment that this sounds like testing by example, where the examples, in fact, are stories of possible interactions. And I think they're largely right. It's just that this is a way of getting examples from the user in the user's language in a way that is much more comfortable for them than saying, take your knowledge of this subject and now break it down into a truth table for me. One of the big objections that came up in our open space discussion was, how do you handle architecting a hierarchical test? If you've got a testing tool that naturally supports hierarchical breakdown, how do you choose what pieces to break down, what the boundaries are? Well, if you're working in the customer's language, you're also naturally working in the customer's mental space. The words they use are an expression of the abstractions they perceive in their domain. So by starting with the customer's naturally spoken abstractions as a starting point, you get some of the advantages of upfront abstraction, less refactoring, not having to get everything from the little details and then slowly abstract out the key structures. But at the same time, you're somewhat protected from making the wrong assumptions, because at least you know that the assumptions you're making make sense to your customer. There are two basic ways to do this sort of hierarchical abstraction that makes for very readable tests. One of them is that sort of customer-driven intentional testing, where you take the customer's high-level statement and then break that down into lower-level statements of what they mean. The other is the sort of aggressive refactoring from the bottom up that we're all familiar with from code. Wait, I said this here, I said this here, extract it, now we have a new method. You can do the same things with tests. I said this test here, I said this test here, let's extract it into a higher level testing structure. And that, my friends, is the core of narrative testing. I have two presentations later this conference, one on domain-specific testing languages, one on narrative testing itself. I encourage you to come and ask questions and etc. if you're interested in these topics.